And one of the first questions that we have for our panelists today is, what is American art song? And so I'll let Beth start if you'd like to.
I'm going to be honest, guys. I'm not sure that I think that that's for me to say. I think it's rapidly evolving. I can tell you in my work as a classical music publicist, I work with all different sort of variations on this theme. Instances when a vocalist is using their voice to communicate and tell a story, and all the other components of that can vary.
Thank you. Darryl?
Well, following the traditional model, obviously art song is the pairing of voice and piano, intimately connected with poetry. However, the whole idea of what is art is evolving in the United States, and particularly from my perspective, what is really essential is the idea of equal representation and equal opportunity. Which is, I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about innovations in art song, that we not go so far beyond what other people have been doing in the standards fare and haven't had an opportunity to be heard, so that we don't forget those anchoring voices in our what have been marginalized communities.
Thank you for that. David?
For me as a composer, American art song, I came to it as a singer. I started writing during my master's degree at Boston University, and for me, American art song is kind of laced with innovative texts and different ways of lifting up text that is that has emotional resonance, I think, to a wide variety of audiences. I also think of art song as being and song recitals as being a very malleable form that can really allow us to meet people where they are. It also, I think, as Mr. Taylor was saying, it has an opportunity to create more equitable space. And that's what American art song is for me.
Sure, thank you for that. And I know a lot of you have really unique and interesting, very interesting. I was reading through some of your bios about what you guys do professionally. And recently I found out that a lot of art songs and a lot of composers are leaning towards creating art, right? Or creating art song geared towards social and political change. So that being said, could you talk about some ways in which American composers have portrayed American culture and political and social change in the past, and how some of them are moving now in terms of the future of art song, right? How are we using that as a medium for social change or social justice?
I can hop in there.
Sure.
As my cat hopped up to the window in the background. So I'm working on a really interesting art song project, actually. The baritone Joshua Hopkins is a Canadian baritone. In 2015, his sister, Nathalie Mormadam, was murdered by an ex-partner who killed two of his other ex-girlfriends in the same day. This has since become recognized as one of the worst cases of domestic violence in Canadian history. Josh really wanted to find a way to address the role that men should be playing in ending gender-based violence, and he wanted to do that through song. So he partnered with Houston Grand Opera and Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra to commission the composer Jake Heggie and eventually the writer Margaret Atwood to create a song cycle called Songs for Murdered Sisters, which has now become a film and an album, and we've been promoting that around the world for the last few months. We partnered with an organization in Canada called White Ribbon to try to inspire 10,000 men to take the pledge never to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women and girls. So this is a really beautiful example of how art song is being created in response to something happening today in society, and then in turn hoping to influence what is happening in society.
Wow. Yeah, Darryl, do you have any response to that, or anything that you know of?
Well, so um, difficulties or um, exigent circumstances have always inspired art. It's comfort is the death of art, and so you can set your clock on it that when society faces difficulties or when any population faces difficulties, it will be reflected in their art. It will be so when Dr. King was assassinated, there was this great outpouring of art and tribute, not just to say well, thank you, but to express their sorrow and their sense of hopelessness and despair um, and just most recently with the our own sort of social awakening with in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. There's been a huge hue and cry from um, artistic personalities and people wanting to express their outrage and their, but it's not just outrage that that one event, their generalized outrage and sense of indignation and calling together their power. I think there's also a great power in art song to be a cultural marker, so that you have art songs that are dedicated to preserving the life of the legacy of Harriet Tubman, say, or of Frederick Douglass. And art song also gives us a purview to writers and ideas that might have gone unnoticed, so that art songs that speak to the writings of the Harlem Renaissance, or that can bring verse of Maya Angelou or Nikki Giovanni to the fore of people that might have not noticed that. It always surprises me, though. Honestly, it really surprises me how myopic people can be living in this country or living in this world and not recognize that simply because you have a home doesn't mean that homelessness doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Simply because your belly is full does not mean that hunger doesn't exist. And that people oftentimes can't see past their own nose. An art song serves that population and helps to sensitize each of us to say, no, the world is not what you think it is. It's not what you've experienced solely.
A great answer for that, and thank you, Darryl, for that. And you also mentioned a bit about Harriet Tubman, excuse me, and like works of art paying homage to people like her, and the works that she has done and the efforts that she has done. Do you think, and anybody can answer this question, David, I'd love to hear from you as a composer. Do you think art song and this new way of communicating and things that people are going through in the country and in the world, really, do you think that art song can make its way into pop culture, perhaps?
I think absolutely it can, and I think that for its relevance, I think that it must, in some regard, uh, at least partner with or recognize. I mean, as as a composer, I bring in all different styles of music and fold that into my classical training, my classical sensibility to better illuminate a text. I've set a lot of contemporary texts, and so, bringing in jazz and pop styles is I think commonplace. I also just want to mention, when you Tislam, when you mentioned, art song as a way of creating social change and visibility, the first thing I thought of was the AIDS Quilt Songbook,
Mhm.
and what that I was in undergrad when I first became aware of that tremendous piece, and have had an opportunity here in New York City to um, present some some concerts in which I've commissioned to composers to continue to write pieces, to lift up the legacy of those that we have lost, but also to for visibility. So I think it's absolutely something that um, I don't know many writers who are not socially minded. I'm sure they exist, but I don't know many artists in general who are not seeking in some way to bring what they are experiencing in the moment, or what they see their friends and colleagues experiencing, and try to bring that to their work in whatever way that may be. And so I think that's as Mr. Taylor said, that's what we do as artists, and the more that we can. I think it's also a calling that we have as artists to hold that mirror up to our society.
Thank you for that. And I have another question about, I guess, the differences between what we see in the art song world and the classical singing world as it compares to musical theater and other types of genres of music. What are some of the differences you see happening in musical theater song, or the difference of art song, and is there room for collaboration between these worlds, right? I think oftentimes as artists, especially as classical artists, we see this almost division of, artists saying, okay, well, we do this and you all do this. How can we, I guess, bridge that gap in this new innovative way of how we perceive art song, and kind of where we see art song going with musical theater collaborating? And anybody can answer that.
I will maybe just kick it off, just because I do live in both worlds, as an art song composer and a musical theater writer. I see it. I see it as very much. I know this. You all are very smart folk, so this will not maybe be surprising to you. But I know for some people, that those two forms of expression seem very disparate, but I do not find that to be so. I think that when I set a text to music, whether it be a text that's going to end up being an art song, or a text that it's going to be in a musical, my job as the writer, as the composer, is to mine the emotional life, to create the emotional resonance or subtext of the text. Like, that is my job. And so I see them as being very, very closely related. And I think we see this in all music, that there's this, our accessibility of being able to listen to so many different styles of music. I mean, it's so easy to see how all of these styles are now intertwined. And so I see art song as very close to musical theater. I don't know if that's helpful or if that's in the direction in which you wish to go, but.
Great, thank you. Darryl, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, just my mind goes to what Bernstein said. He says it's all music, and so did Duke Ellington. He says it's all music. That the divisions that between us are false barriers. They're phantoms. They don't really exist, but they become these things that we become fixated on, our little silos, our little areas our corners that we can become fixated on. And particularly classical music is particularly guilty of this elitist or supremacist view that somehow the aspirations or the art, the ideas of culture only exist in the classical world. And I'm really happy when I see there are some people that despite the barriers of commercialism, and this is the problem. I think this is where the real barrier exists, where in order for a product in the popular music field to be supported, it must be commercially viable. In order for it to be commercially viable, there's a guard at the door that says this can pass, this can't pass, and that's where there is room for negotiation if you can be genuinely brilliant. Like Sean Okpekbolo is genuinely brilliant. Dave Ragland is genuinely brilliant, but they are also very, very flexible composers. And if I mean, can you imagine if a Sean Okapebolo had access to Beyonce? I mean, the ideas, the opportunities are boundless, boundless. But we shouldn't be so quick to be so sure of ourselves. Sean Okpebolo. It's a he. He's a professor, Dr. Sean Okpebolo. Okpebholo. Listen, I deserve some brownie points for being able to spell Sean's last name, Sean Okpebolo. Um, or Tishan Sori or others like that are really brilliant and have real relevant things to say. And I think that artists like that have that sort of clout, like like
Julia Bullock is a great example, I think.
well beyond Cardi B, well beyond or Megan Thee Stallion, but to people that go beyond the carnal ideation and into real deep. I mean, the things that Beyonce has been able to create. If that's not art, I don't know what is. That is true art. It's just different from what we would do.
Sure. And I'm happy that you mentioned the Beyonce thing. For some people may or may not know about Beyonce's big Coachella performance that she performed, but there was all these different cross-generational genre uh, being added into this performance. So you had like band, and you had some classical music, you had like ballet, modern. And so to that point, it brings me to my next question about race and American culture and American music. How do you think race plays into the genre of art song? And do you think race plays into the genre of art song? Do you think that it'll change the canon of what we perceive art song to be as American art song? So for me as a student, oftentimes when I think American art song, I think of Appalachian melodies and things of that nature falling under that category. But how do you think race plays into what we see as the canon of American art song or
Let,
American music?
let me take the lead on that.
Sure.
The in the natal stages of the development of jazz,
Hmm.
there was the idea of this being American, the opportunity for this being America's classical music. This happened around the same time as other countries were looking to distinguish their national voices. And this was really, it was very obvious and clear that this was a great opportunity for America to establish its genuine American footprint. And unfortunately, racism prevented that from happening because the people that were most um, uh, racism and classism. Because the people that were most creative with creation of jazz were black, and that jazz and blues were being created in what they considered to be low places that were beneath the station of the classical and the classical academy. So here's the thing: jazz came knocking several times, still is knocking to some extent, came knocking several times saying, well, this is your long lost branch. We'd like to be included. And classical music said, no, with that thing that you're doing, no, you don't have any place here. And jazz and pop and R&B, or jazz and blues that became, of course, R&B and became pop and country and all, said, oh, you don't want us? Well, we'll go on and flower in this other way. And it became this other thing that is so much more relevant. When anthropologists 200, 300 years hence look back at our culture, they will look at what was important to us, what was important to the people, what was impactful for the people, what moved the people. What were people listening to in protests? Were they listening to? Were they more inclined to listen to Aretha Franklin, or were they more inclined to listen to Eileen Farrell? Yeah, those sorts of things are going to be important, and the classical establishment continues at its peril um, dis- keep any sort of distinction or barrier between itself and the relevance of the people.
Thank you. David or Beth, do you have any answer to that?
I think where I most often see race cropping up in American classical music is a perception issue. So I think that there's this perception that Black creators of classical music like Shauna Pueblo are working today. But if we look back to somebody like Harry T. Burleigh or Ella Shepherd, the people who were working with the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who were concertizing American spirituals, those are people who were contributing to foundational classical music in America. And we tend to just sort of sweep them into like this, oh, this is spiritual music, like this isn't classical music, but it absolutely is and was. You know, the Fisk Jubilee Singers did touring around the world and were representing what American music was, even before jazz. I also think that there are, lots of projects today, particularly as we step outside that kind of very prescriptive piano, poetry, singer format. I think that we're seeing a lot of collaboration that's really pushing the genre, right? You know, Darryl talked about the collaborations amongst jazz and classical music or pop and classical music, and I think we're seeing that all over the place. A really beautiful example that actually just ended after I think a decade run is the Resonant Bodies Festival in Brooklyn. I don't know if you guys know of this organization. So Lucy DeGray founded this festival, and what she did was give vocalists 45 minutes a set, and got people like the New York Times to come listen, and said, "Sing me your urgent music. Show me what's important to you." The singers got total carte blanche to curate. They brought in incredible collaborators from other genres, from other art forms, and really broadened our expectation or our perception of what art song can be.
Thank you for that. David, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I think I want to add is that, I am a voice teacher, and I'm well aware that I think that education at the undergrad and graduate level has not done the best job,
Sure.
certainly, of representing not only the writers that we're talking about, but representing allowing artists of all experiences to see themselves in this genre, and I think that I'm surprised that has not changed as swiftly as I feel like it needs to. I'll just maybe leave it there.
Yeah. And you mentioned something really important about, I guess, the educational perspective in regards to art song. So this question is for everybody. How do you think the Academy and other institutions can change the trajectory of how we utilize art song in music education?
Can you repeat the tail end of that? Sorry, Tislam.
Sure. How can the Academy and other institutions change the trajectory of how we utilize art song in music education?
Well, so the idea of waiting for students to voice an interest in diverse ideas in culture, it's foreign to education in general. You don't wait for people to say, "Well, I'm interested in knowing about Bach." You say, "No, this is important. You must know about this." You don't say that, I think I'm interested in knowing about math. Maybe I'll learn a little bit about science." No, you don't. Whether you want to know about it or not, this is important. If you're going to be an educated person, you must know about this. And so, to the extent that we can increase the importance, placing more importance on the varying of our lens and with intention, do that very, very specifically, and say, okay, if your whole degree recital or everything you've studied looks like a who's who of dead white men, then we failed. We should look at it as a personal failing and say, okay, and I have to, I'll give a little cover to some people. I have to very intentionally do that for myself. And I'm the founder of the African American Art Song Alliance. I have to very intentionally say, okay, now I've I've been very careful to make sure I've given a standard sort of education. But has this person ever done anything by a woman? Have they done anything by anybody that's outside of Europe? Have they done anything that's outside of their cultural the European gaze? And if they haven't, then I don't blame the student. I blame me, and I say, okay, no, get it together, Darryl, and make sure that if I don't know where something is, hello, that's why they make libraries. Get to the library, get thee to the library, and learn what don't you know, and correct yourself.
I just wanted to add to that, because I think that is so to the heart of what I was alluding to earlier. It's to be a teacher is to endlessly be the student, and it is it's our responsibility, if we, as I know we do, want to see this beautiful art form continue, to educate ourselves and to provide opportunities for our students, and to encourage them, inspire them to do the same. I mean, I not surprisingly, I'm a music nerd. I mean, I spend all of my free Saturdays at Syracuse University in the library. The afternoon, like after brunch, I would go and just listen to records, because that's how I rolled back then. And that was the discovery of that music has stayed with me to today. And I think that the thing is, what I have found in teaching is that now my students have access to everything and they research nothing. That is probably an overstatement, but they have access to everything, so they don't necessarily think to do that work. So I have to model that for them. That is my job, to stay endlessly curious.
Thank you for that. Beth, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm just thinking about sort of the larger trend that David just touched on,
Sure.
that we're sort of depriving ourselves of that kind of meandering, stumbling upon discovery, right? When you know that it's out there and you know that you can be very incisive and go find that exact piece of information that you need, you sort of lose that impetus to just wander, right? Like that was such an important part of my education as well.
Sure.
It's like the Strand for music, but the Strand is not the Strand anymore. Yeah. So like that's.
So how do we encourage that? How do we encourage that?
And you make such a vivid and important example, David, that this current generation has access to all knowledge, and they look so they take the lowest hanging fruit, and there's so much more beyond that. But personally, for my own students, I encourage them, if you're writing a paper for me, I say, I don't want to only see online resources. Get to a library. Make sure you check out books that you have touched some paper at some point in your life. If only because, I mean, obviously I think that it's kind of a losing battle. I think all media is going to digital, but the fact that you can get to library personally, my own experience has been, once you're in a place and you realize how little you know, it's because you're surrounded by it. Being on a page, unless, I mean, I guess Google search and search engines can help you, but they are prescribed in a certain way. Going to a library, really good libraries, especially good research libraries, can give you access, and I have this particular foible where I will get into a library or into a museum, and someone will have to pull me out. I will get sick. I'm one of those persons that will be there for hours and hours and hours looking at the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and then you'll find me cowering in a corner and say, but I haven't been to the third floor. I gotta get there. But so I don't want to suggest that students should make themselves sick, but that there's so much that when you get into those places, that letting your imagination just explode and be fed by what you don't know.
And in doing that, I think what I have found in my own learning is I start to see, I'm like, oh wait, this connects to this, that connects to that, and that's like it's just, I know that this is not our topic, but the quandary with education is you're given this information, sometimes without a framework, and so it's like, that type of connectivity is so important, I think, for artists. So it's rooted, it's grounded in something real.
That's what I'm thinking about too, right? Like that synthesis, that interrelatedness. I think the same thing when I was in college, I went to the double degree program at Johns Hopkins and Peabody Conservatory. And often there weren't that many of us. So all of us sort of had to act as informal guides when high schoolers and their parents would come visit and want to know about the double degree program. And especially once I was in grad school, I really thought, like, I hope that some of these kids go to, if they're not a double degree student, I hope that they go to a university for undergrad. I hope that they read a lot of literature and like take Latin American culture classes and like learn some languages and like live some life, right? Because when I think about like my favorite communicators, particularly in recital rep in art song, they're people who have lived life and are comfortable showing parts of themselves in that storytelling. When I was singing, I was always much more comfortable in operatic rep when I could put on a costume and a wig and makeup and be someone else. I found the sort of exposure that art song requires much scarier, like much more terrifying. There's no artifice. There's nothing in between you and the audience. The people, Jamie Barton and Julia Bullock are probably my favorite recitalists. And both of them are just so adept at truth on stage, right? Like you can just see what is true. And I think that, if as people are coming up today, what they're doing is listening to a particular recording online, or perhaps even just one track for an assignment that somebody has prescribed for them, like they're losing out on that sort of greater discovery and that greater life experience that then leads to those truthful performances.
Wow, thank you for that. And we have some questions from some of our audience members. And then the first one reads, does art song have its own diaspora, and is Taylor Swift an art song composer? I like that. Anybody can answer.
Well, I'm a diaspora of art song. I mean, there's a continuity of art song that goes from place to place, but when you think of diaspora, you're thinking about peoples. At least that's my understanding of the idea of diaspora.
Sure.
The diaspora of Latin people, or Latinx people, or the diaspora of African people throughout the world, the African diaspora. I've not. I mean, there's a cultural continuity of a sort with art song, and it is when it arrives to America, that which had been so fertily engaged in Europe, they were seeking to continue in America, which is how they kind of lost their way, because they were trying to replicate something that was not their experience. The French were not trying to be Germans. The Germans were certainly not trying to be Americans. One would say that now that perhaps they are to some extent. There are some population areas that reflect a lot more American culture. But in terms of the classical culture, when then McDowell was writing things in German and Griffiths were writing things in French and trying to reflect on those cultural things while ignoring the stuff under their feet, ignoring the parlor life in the world and the cakewalk, and not exactly ignoring it, but certainly not wholesale embracing it, and to the extent that it became the part and parcel of their work. And branching that into larger scale things. So America had missed that opportunity to some extent earlier on, where it could have who knows how it could have flowered later. Taylor Swift as an art song composer, she's an artist. She but she is accountable to a record label. And that's where it is somewhat limiting for her and limiting for art in general. Prince, famously came to loggerheads with his record label because they wouldn't allow him complete autonomy. Well, Prince was an artist. Prince wanted to do what he wanted to do. And when they wouldn't allow him to do that, rather than just play and get along, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll change my name. That's what an artist does. That's what an artist does. Aha. Yeah. the trouble kid. I don't see Taylor Swift becoming the artist formerly known as Taylor Swift anytime soon.
Thank you. I have another question. How can we make art song accessible and equitable for all, or American art song accessible and equitable for all?
I mean, I don't have an answer, so I shouldn't have unmuted, but I'll just say that that's the $1 million question. And I mean, I think that, I'm grateful for my education and the role that art song played in it. But I think that one of the things that comes to me first is that, we have, I think, a wonderful opportunity in our institutions to create community with our communities, to create, to create relationships with our communities. So the work that we're doing with our students is going out to the world, and I think that that's one of the ways where that can happen, that accessibility can happen. I mean, I had an opportunity to present a concert of my songs at Carnegie Hall for my 40th birthday a couple of years ago, and 50% of the audience had never been to a song recital before, and several of them have actually told me I've gone to other song recitals. So I feel like there's, it's just having some sort of connection with, and I saw someone put in the chat at some point recently saying art song is an unfortunate moniker, and I think that in some ways, I mean, that's getting into a different topic, but I think in some ways that's part of the barrier, is that I'm rambling, but I feel like it's kind of all of this is connected. We have an opportunity through our institutions to draw the circle wider, and create more access and equity.
Beth, Darryl, do you have anything to add to that, perhaps?
Well, we all have in community. There's power. In each of us, every record label, every radio station, every opera company, every college depends upon the support of community. There's none of them that can stand without some sort of accountability. And when you go to performance series and see lack of representation, being mute continues. That silence is consent in that sort of idea, so that you say, oh yeah, that we want to hear more Mozart. Oh yeah, by all means, give us another Barber of Seville, because we really haven't gotten it enough. We don't know enough about Carmen to we really need to at least 500 more performances of Aida, before we can really get to the meat of it. And there's a certain truth to that. You have to have multiple performances of any work to really understand the thing. But that's where the trick comes in. A work like Central Park 5, which is a brilliant work by Anthony Davis. Don't look for it to become. I don't think it's going to be part of standard fare because of it. It will not get enough performances to get to that deep rooted understanding. Same thing with or Still's Costasso. As brilliant a work as that is, the fact that most people don't know what Costasso is, don't know that William Grant Still wrote 9 grand operas, no less a personage than William Grant Still, and not one of them has been performed at the Met. Not one of them. Not one of those operas has been performed at the Met. How can we ever get to that same sort of deep understanding, which, art, that's why we call it art song. We talk about, so it's more than just popular art as opposed to popular, getting into the deep trenches of emotional understanding. I'll go back to my own personal example of Beyonce. So I think that the populace is capable of this deep understanding. People, when you have your favorite cut of Beyonce 1, they will listen to it many times. They'll go and support those artists many times, even though oftentimes it's the same repertoire. And they will know every nuance. They'll know every little thing about that. And so that when the movie about Queen comes out, something either resonates as true or false to us. Why? Because people really know what Freddie Mercury was. They know why, because they were at all of those performances, and they listened intently, and they listen deeply for that. That's the level that's art. Then when you're going into understanding it on that holistic sort of level. But if everything kind of stays above on the surface, then you don't have that opportunity. So marginalized composers get relegated to the field, the same sort of gaze as you would pop music, that you have recordings that come out. This really bugs me. Someone was talking about Spotify, and this really bugs me about Spotify and in other streaming things. Personally, when I record a CD, I think through the narrative. I think through this, next to this, next to this, next to this. It never dawns on me that somebody might not listen to track 3 before they listen to track 4, and or that they would pull that out and not get a sense of the full understanding. Also, I think one of the great impoverishments to the world is the fact that we do not, as someone pointed out, that we don't have liner notes anymore. The lion's share of the CDs go out with liner notes, but they're not included in your streams, and so there's all this information that doesn't get disseminated, and it's a shame. I feel like I've gone a little tangential and a little off topic, but in community there's power. If we as a whole recognize and say, hey, there hasn't been one woman on your entire thing. Get it together. And not just with one woman either. Don't come and give me just one woman and say that should settle it. Excuse me, women are not one millionth of the population. They're over 50% of the population, and their voices matter. The same thing with people of color, and the same thing with ideas having to do with status, etc.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from attendees from Brian Gill. He asked, David, if you would speak a bit about your Draw the Circle Wider project.
Sure. I'll just briefly mention my collaborator Tom Gualtieri and I met at the BMI Musical Theater Workshop back in 2003, and we've been writing together ever since. And one of the things that we have talked about quite a bit is the inequity in the American musical theater on Broadway. Certainly, when this is something that obviously is there's been a long overdue reckoning that is happening now. We created a video series. We launched series 1 last spring during the pandemic. And what we're doing is we're interviewing artists who are diverse in all the ways that we are made diverse, and asking them about their experiences of equity or inequity in the arts, specifically in the theater. And then what we do as white cisgender men is sit back and listen and receive, and then we write a song for them based on whatever they choose to share with us that they premiere at the end of the episode. So our first series had Ali Stroker, Ryan Redmond, Cindy Chung, and Jonathan Burke, all brilliant Broadway artists. Our second season series is getting ready to be launched, and I didn't tell you this because we haven't announced it officially yet, but it leads with Andre DeShields, who won the Tony Award for his amazing performance as Hermes in Hadestown. L. Morgan Lee, fantastic trans actress. Ahmed Maksud, who was in the band's Visit, and Aisha Jackson, who played Anna in Frozen. So we're really excited about having these conversations, and as allies, having the conversations about when we step in it and make mistakes, and being able to learn from those moments. And our artists have been incredibly generous with us. We're so grateful for that.
Thank you for that. Beth, there was a question for you in the chat about, you mentioned a couple of artists whose art songs interpretations you really enjoy. Can you say more about those artists and who we can listen to or follow?
Yes, absolutely. So the two that I had already mentioned were the American mezzo Jamie Barton and the American soprano Julia Bullock. Both absolutely incredible, gifted performers who do a really healthy balance of operatic and recital repertoire. I also really enjoyed seeing Jen Shu perform at Resbod's a couple years ago. So Jen is an Asian American vocalist who also plays an incredible number of Asian stringed instruments, most of which I'm not familiar with enough to even know the names. She composes her work. She did an incredible through-composed work that was about 45 minutes long, in which she played the instruments and sang and crafted this entire narrative. It was unbelievable. Lucy DeGray is also someone who does a ton of work in new music, extended vocal technique, and lots of brilliant collaborations. Will Liverman is a young baritone. He just released an album, actually, that Sean was one of the composers on. He is a really incredible performer who's also commissioning and curating really fascinating works. He's doing a project with Lyric Opera here in Chicago around Figaro in Barber, but sort of deconstructing that entire idea. The baritone Joshua Hopkins, who was on that Songs for Murdered Sisters project that I mentioned before, he's someone who is really devoted to art song repertoire. I would say look for composers that you admire and then see who they're collaborating with, right? Like who their muses are, who's commissioning them, and that'll give you some really good rabbit holes to go down.
Thank you. And we're about almost out of time for questions, but if you guys would give us one wrap up or one thing that you can leave the audience members with regarding American art song and the future of, art song in the industry. If you could tell us a bit about what you perceive the industry, where you perceive the industry going, and just some final words of whatever it is that you want to share with us.
I'll just say that I have been developing other branches of my tree as an artist in the last couple of years. But I love art song tremendously, and I look forward to kind of returning to it in earnest with new collaborations. There's nothing more to me collaborative than working with a poet and a singer and trying to craft a new piece that has meaning to them and then hopefully to the audience. The one thing that I just want to lift up, which is what I started with, is this issue of accessibility and how do we continue to think about creating space for everyone to receive this, because we know what these experiences mean to us as creators and as people who produce and write and receive this work. And it's like kind of the best game in town. And I feel like there are just so many people that are missing out on that experience. And that's the one thing I'm curious about as a writer. How can I draw the circle wider to create, to draw more people in? I think it's so important.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to assume I'm not the only one on this session today that is beyond eager to get back to real life performance when you have like the resonance of the human voice in your eardrums. But I will say that I think that one of the things that the past year has taught us is that there is some value in the increased accessibility of streamed performances. One of the things that I'm really excited to see classical music and art music explore is what we can do with the film medium, right? So layering in that music, the poetry, but also that visual medium. I think that there are a lot of ways in which we might find new audiences and new forms of expression that way. You know, people who might not be willing to fork over $45 and 3 hours of their time, including transit, to come give Art Song a try, might be willing to tune in from their couches for a recital, might be willing to tune into something free or $5 or $20. I think that increased geographic accessibility, the increased financial and time accessibility could be really important for us in reaching new people. And I think that if we can find ways to communicate visually, layered in with organically with what we're doing, right? Like I'm not talking about a single standalone camera that just tries to capture the recital experience. I'm talking about new ways in which we might weave visuals into what we're doing. I think that could be a really exciting growth area for us.
Thank you, Beth.
Well, I've been working with I founded the African American Art Song Alliance back in 1997. I host a conference on art song, African American art song, every 5 years, and the next thank God it was every 5 years, because the next iteration for that is 2022. So fortunately, we weren't caught at as other places that host every year, having to figure out how to do an online model of what we're doing. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary. We usually meet in February of February of the given year. In 2022, we will move it to October to give people enough time for expected herd immunity and people to feel comfortable with making travel plans. And I salute you, Beth. That's exactly our feeling about. There's nothing that beats being in person, hearing the voice in person, having conversations that don't conclude with you hitting the leave button on Zoom, where you actually have to make a commitment to leave the room. And so that as part of that conference, we talk an awful lot about the future of presenting art song and presenting the study of this and how we continue to advance out of the margins.
Sure. And thank you guys for answering that question. And again, can we have another round of applause? I know everybody's home and on Zoom with mics muted, but if we can give our panelists another round of applause, that would be great, for their feedback and their wonderful answers to our questions today.